joining us today. Would you mind sharing with our audience who you are?
Yes, I'm Larry Spencer, and I came to Plymouth State, or actually to Plymouth in 1967 as a instructor in biology. I had my thesis was in progress, and so I didn't actually finish my PhD till 1968. But I came sort of as a new PhD to a department that really hadn't had anybody with a PhD in the whole history of the college, so it was kind of an interesting experience.
Do you recall your first year's salary?
Yes, it was about $7,000, and at that particular point I didn't realize until I talked to some of the other faculty members that had come the same year that I could have actually negotiated for a larger salary, but at that particular point, 7,000 compared to the 2,000 I was earning as a graduate student seemed like an awful lot.
The population at the time, population of students at the time?
Well, it was a little bit different for me because I had come from a huge university. I came from Colorado State, which at that time probably had 12 or 14,000 students, and I think the student population at Plymouth was about 1,500 when I came. So it was about the same size as my high school that I graduated with in Bethesda, Maryland. So it seemed kind of a shock to come from a big school to a small school. And also the fact was that the first year that I was here, they were in the process of building Boyd Hall, which was going to be the science building. And so the first year I was here, we were in the only academic building on campus at that time, shared with all the other departments. And so we had our labs and what have you in a couple rooms on the first floor of that building. And my office was actually in the basement of Mary Lyons. It was an old extra room. So my room actually had a bathroom. Some of the other faculty had a shower. So it was kind of interesting doing that.
Can you remember the number of employees, approximately?
It was very small. I mean, it was small enough so that, we had faculty wives group, and, they would arrange for social things with all the faculty because it was such a small group of faculty.
And the president at the time?
And the president at the time was Dr. Harold Hyde. And I had interviewed for the job in Chicago with him and John Foley as they had a meeting. So I had never actually seen Plymouth before I got to Plymouth. And at that particular time, we drove up from the south, from Massachusetts on Interstate 93, and it ended at Plymouth, and we took the exit and came into town. And at that time we said, why did we come here? Because the town wasn't necessarily run down, but if you've been to Plymouth today, you know that the streets have trees, and the college has its own campus and what have you. And when we came here, the college campus was mixed up with the elementary in the middle and the high school, and Main Street wasn't really, wasn't really a nice street, so to speak. And we thought, well, maybe we should turn around and go back home. But that changed over the time that I was here, our impression in terms of being in a small town.
How many years were you employed at Plymouth?
Well, that's hard to say because technically I retired fully in 2003 after serving 35 years. And then I taught another 10 years as part-time. And then I was supposed to have retired then, but then I have my office in the building and I come up, 1 or 2 days a week. And although I don't get paid, I do participate in some of the department functions and help out mentoring some of the students in our bioseminar course. So I guess technically speaking, I am retired, but in the real sense, I'm not retired because I still feel myself as a biological scientist and dealing with our students today.
When you were hired that first year, what classes would you have taught?
Well, when I talked to Harold and John, they said, could I teach a botany course? And of course, I was a zoologist, but I'm wanting a job. I said, oh, sure, I could teach a botany course. So the first year I was here, I taught a general botany course. After that particular time, we had enough faculty members that came in, and so I stopped teaching botany and started doing more, courses that were in my realm of expertise, which is the zoological sciences. But I think during my time period at Plymouth, I probably have taught almost every single course in the biological science catalog.
outside of teaching, what contact did you have with students?
Well, I always try to, to have, you realize that students see you in the classroom and it's really different when they see you at home. So I often try to have, at least with my upper division classes, once a year to have a barbecue or something, a spaghetti feed or something like that at my house. And so that, over the years has made a big difference in them seeing me as an individual and not necessarily just in front of the classroom. And it's worked out because right now I had some students the very first year that I was here that now live in the Plymouth area that we get together maybe once a month for go out to eat lunch and go for a hike, and it's kind of fun to have people that you've known for the 50 years that you've been in town that you get back together again with.
Could you describe for me what it was like perhaps during your first year? What responsibilities you would have had? How hectic it could have been?
Well, it was a very different campus when I first came here because Harold Hyde thought of himself more like a principal than a college president. So he pretty much had his thumb on everything, and there wasn't a lot of, there was academic freedom. I mean, there was no problem with that. But in terms of initiative and things like that, it was kind of difficult because Harold was in charge. And I can remember one faculty meeting, he said it was his football and we would play by his rules because the faculty wanted to do something that he didn't necessarily want to do. The interesting thing is, of course, he did go along with the faculty, in terms of that. But over the years, when Harold retired, we got new individuals coming in terms of the administration said that, look, the institution's going to be what you make of it. And that gave the faculty a lot more freedom in terms of innovation for programs and outreach to the community and things like that. So that made a big difference. But the other thing made a big difference was, of course, the building of Boyd Hall, because essentially there was one academic building when I came here, and then very soon thereafter there were two academic buildings with Boyd Hall and Hyde Hall, and that sort of split up the campus, but that also meant, though, that the individual programs had places to grow. And of course, the same year, that was also the establishment of the gymnasium down in the interval, and that also made a big difference in terms of the college having more to offer their students, more experiences.
You've alluded to this a little bit, but after you arrived in Plymouth, what was it about the college or the town that made you feel that you had eventually made the right decision to stay?
Well, I think I made the wrong decision, is the way I felt, because it was pretty small, and not to be negative about it, but the people that I was working with had EDs rather than PhDs, and so they were more interested in education, whereas I had come from a large research institution, Colorado State, and had been in Oregon State before that, and those were big research institutions where science was being done and not education being done. But I think what made a big difference for me was after I took my first sabbatical at Berkeley and came back and realized that being on a small campus had a lot of benefits. Because at Berkeley, students, had some access to computers, but not very much. They had some access to libraries, but not very much. And then I realized at Plymouth that, we were sort of at the forefront in terms of allowing students to get access to the library and to the computers. And of course, there weren't computers at that particular time, but that sort of situation, that being at a small school, the students were really had a lot more access to faculty and particularly as the department grew and some of the people in the department started doing their own research, the students had access to that faculty research and became involved in research projects. So, and then, having done, I sort of said that, I've been here at Plymouth for 45 years, but I haven't been at Plymouth because every 7th year I took a full year sabbatical and went to places like Berkeley and Boulder and Hawaii and China and places like that. And going away to places makes you realize what you have back at home. And that's the thing is really important, is that Plymouth has always been sort of student oriented. That's our goal, is to do our best by our students. And I always told my students I was a really nasty guy. I mean, I was hard-nosed. I wanted them to do well. And I told them, I said, when you graduate from Plymouth, I want you to have the same education that you would have had if you went to Harvard, or if you went to Yale, or if you went to UC Berkeley. I want you to be equivalent to that. I don't want you to be, second rate. Because if you follow along with what I make you do, you are equivalent in terms of your capabilities as any of those students. If I make it easy on you, you won't be, and you'll realize that later on.
Was there someone at Plymouth State that had an influence on you when you first arrived here, and even maybe over time?
Well, some have some positive influences and some negative influences. The department chair at that particular time was George Salmons, and he was quite an interesting guy. I have lots of stories that I could tell about him. And I would say his what shall we say, his effect on me was sort of negative, because he didn't actually want me to have a promotion and tenure at the end of my time period. And that actually had to go to the Faculty Welfare Committee to actually get promotion and tenure. And that was because he wasn't very well organized. He didn't see, some of the things that I thought were important things to happen. But at the same time, it was a very small department, and I have to say that Al Davis, who was a chemist, sort of became my mentor, not necessarily in terms of academic, but in terms of just being integrated into the community, because as faculty, we would go down to the local five and dime store and have coffee, and I was so poor that I could not afford a cup of coffee, but Al would buy me a cup of coffee or hot chocolate, and Al also took me under his arms. He was the ski coach at that particular time, and we would go out to Tenny Mountain, and I really didn't know how to ski, but Al said I could be a sort of assistant coach, and I can remember poking holes in the ground for the poles and putting the purple dye to show where the and so at that particular time he sort of integrated me into the sense of being a member of the department and being a member of the Plymouth community.
During the time you've been at Plymouth, how many years now? I'm kidding.
Well, 45, and 45, actually I've been in town 51 years in terms of actually living in the area.
What changes have you seen take place? You've alluded to a few already, but what changes?
Well, I think the major one is that, the college has become a campus. When I first came here, the college had the elementary school in the bottom of the administration building. The middle school was in its own separate building. The high school had shops and things like that. And the roads went through campus, and you didn't feel like there was any kind of unity to the campus. And over the time period, we've added a number of new buildings, particularly the Silver Cultural Arts Center, that made a big difference in terms of the music and theater arts program. But we've closed off all the roads in campus, and we had a wonderful horticulturist that planted all sorts of trees and flowers. And so now when you come to campus, you really feel that it is a college campus. It has some unity. And at the same time, though, I think the town has benefited because the elementary school, middle school, and high school have moved out to their own campus, and they were able to develop much further out there than they would have been if they just stayed right where they were when I first came. And then also, I alluded to the fact that the downtown has really become much more, I guess you could say, urbane. Trees have been planted, coffee shops and restaurants and things like that have been built on, come into the town. So you really feel that you're coming to a cosmopolitan town as compared to sort of a blue-class worker town.
But we missed that five and dime store.
I missed that five and dime store.
What influence, if any, do you feel you had on this institution and your students over time?
Well, I think the the big thing is that, you know, I went away every 7th year, and of course when you go away every 7th year, you come back with new ideas. And one of the ideas that, you know, I and other people in the department pushed was the idea of the Center for the Environment, which it took a long, long time. I can remember I did actually write a paper to Harold Hyde, you know, proposing that we have a Center for the Environment, which he sent back to me with my spelling errors, you know, circled and what have you. But, you know, as the college progressed, we did see the importance of the fact that that we do live in a wonderful environment, and that the college need to have more impact in terms of helping out the residents of the state to manage that environment. And so when the Center for the Environment was first established, we finally had a person who had full-time responsibility to get out and go and, you know, meet with the State Department of Environmental Services, to meet with the different lake you know, groups and what have you. Because as a faculty member, even though we wanted to do that earlier on, you know, our teaching lists were so, just shall we say, constrained by, you know, how many classes you had to teach, we couldn't really do that. And so when the first director, Steve Call, came in for the Center of the Environment, that was his first job, was to go out and meet these groups. And that actually made a name for Plymouth, because before that time, you know, oh, Plymouth, did they have a biology department? Or do they do stuff in science? Oh, I don't think so, you know. But then when the center came in, they realized that, yes, this was a department that actually, you know, had an impact on the state.
So the Center of the Environment sounds like it provided a lot of practical experience for the students?
Some of it, yeah, because, you know, having relationships with some of the, and of course when Don Wharton was here, we became a university rather than a college. And that meant that we ended up having graduate students, and the graduate students then began to do some of their projects with some of the lake groups and you know, with Hubbard Brook and things like that. And so that took them beyond the campus. And that was not only good for the graduate students, but it also meant that some of our undergraduate students could act as field assistants and things like that on some of those projects. And then, of course, since that time, the faculty have developed relationships with Dartmouth and with UNH and what have you. And so not only are we doing more, you know, kind of field projects, but also doing projects that are more sort of laboratory oriented.
What changes, if any, have we learned from our past that might support those people that are teaching, working at Plymouth today?
Well, I think, you know, one of the things that we were so focused when I came on just simply, you know, covering your classes. And the idea was that you didn't have time to do anything else other than to cover your classes. And then as we've sort of become more associated with research, that implies that the faculty member just simply cannot, you know, have his yellow notes from when he was, you know, in graduate school, but you have to keep up with what's going on in the world of science. And that means, in some ways that's kind of bad, because you look at major research universities and sometimes what happens is the faculty are so involved in research that they're not involved in teaching. But Plymouth is such a small institution that the folks that are doing research are also strongly involved in the teaching, and the two components, the research and the teaching, become integrated with each other. And as a result, you have a much stronger, you know, the synthesis, that you can say. You know, at a big university, a researcher is a researcher and may teach a class or two, but there's not much else. But here at Plymouth, the researcher is also the professor in the classroom, and students are actually maybe doing some sort of project in the classroom that relates to the research project that the professor is doing themselves. And the student can see that, well, you know, I can't stop my horizons. My horizons have to be much broader in terms of perspective, you know, so that makes a big difference. I don't know if it's the same in other departments. I think like in psychology, you know, there's the same sort of emphasis, you know, that you have to keep up with your field, that you just simply can't, you know, retire once you come to Plymouth with your notes that you had from, you know, 15 years ago.
Time is coming to a close. Is there anything we haven't covered today that you'd like to share with our audience?
Well, the thing that should be emphasized is that Plymouth has become much more cosmopolitan over the time that I've been here. When I first came, even though we were Plymouth State College and had switched from being Plymouth Teachers College, I think in 1963, there were still just pretty much sort of two majors. There was a major in business, and then there was a major in physical education. And then the liberal arts were fairly small as compared. And what has happened, of course, is the business itself has really grown, and because we added an MBA and what have you. And the physical ed program became an HPER, rather, expanded into health and a lot of other ramifications from that. But at the same time, the liberal arts themselves have expanded so that we have sort of a three-pronged program. We still have a strong business program, a strong program HBR, but we have a very strong program in psychology, the biology, chemistry, meteorology, and what have you. And that has brought a lot more breadth to the institution as compared to. The other thing is that when I first came, most of the students that I had were the first generation to go to college, and therefore were pretty devoted to their studies because they realized that their parents are spending a lot of money on them to come to college. Towards the end, it was an interesting experience. I taught a graduate course in limnology, and one of the women that I had in the limnology course, I had their parents, 20 odd years before in a biology course, so really quite different. So, and of course, in some ways, then those students that are here today are second or third generation college students, and they don't necessarily have the same drive. But I think in the biological sciences, because they have picked a subject area that's a little bit more, requires a little bit more effort because of the chemistry and the physics and the math that they have to take, that they're still pretty darn good students, that they've chosen this particular major because they really want to be a biological scientist and not just simply as a default kind of thing. So that.
My last question, is there a memory of Plymouth that has stayed with you all these years? Is there a memory, something that happened, something that someone said? And you can pass.
Well, I just think, I've been to some pretty high, institutions, Berkeley and UC Boulder and University of Hawaii, places like that. And I realized that I could have made it in any of those places as a faculty member, but I felt much more at home at Plymouth because of the size. Here at Plymouth, I was sort of one-on-one with my students. I could have my class, of maybe 10 or 15 over to my house. Whereas at those institutions, I had a friend that taught the U.S. history class at Ohio State. He had 17 faculty that taught one course, and over, I think, 3,000 or 4,000 students. I couldn't imagine having 3,000 or 4,000 students over to my house for a picnic or a barbecue. But here at Plymouth, with maybe having 15 kids in my upper division ecology class at the end of the year, it was very easy to have them over to my house to enjoy seeing them on a personal basis as compared to having them in class. And then, of course, the other thing is that being at a small school, and we've traveled, all over the world, you come across some of your students in some of the oddest places. I think one story that really stands out in my mind is that we were on the island of Kauai. We were going to the beach that's where the Nepali Trail comes off. And I told my wife I needed to go to the restroom, and so they went down to the beach and I went over to the restroom, and lo and behold, I saw one of the students that I had in the historical geology class that had just came off of the hiking the Nepali Trail, I enjoyed having him in class, and I enjoyed seeing him, out of context in Hawaii. And that's happened any number of times where I've met my students someplace far, far away from Plymouth. But they knew who I was because the classes were small and the campus was small, and so we were on a one-to-one relationship. So that's the they always say, do you want to be a small frog in a big pond or a big frog in a small pond? And being at Plymouth, not necessarily that I'm a big frog, but it was much more a personal kind of experience being at a small university where you knew not just the students but the faculty, and not just the students and the faculty in your own department, but the students and the faculty in the whole college.
Thank you very much for your willingness to be interviewed today as part of the 150th, which will occur in 2021.
Well, I appreciate being able to provide some background.